Hi, my name is Megan, and this is the story of my birth of my second child. Just a trigger warning ahead of time, involves prematurity and placental abruption. So I was 29 weeks pregnant when I was driving down the road, had my husband in the passenger seat and my sister-in-law in the back seat with my son, who was 19 months at the time. And I was stopped at a light going to make a left when I felt something. I don't know, maybe I peed myself. I wasn't really sure. Sorry for the graphicness, but I didn't know what it was. So I reached down and picked up my hand, and it was covered in blood. And I said to my husband and my sister-in-law, "It looks like there's a change of plans. I'm bleeding. We're gonna have to go to the hospital." So my husband says, "Pull over there, where I was going to make a left, and I'll drive." Great, easy. So I'm sitting at that light, and as soon as it turned left, I remember everything just getting black around me. And I just said, "Make it through the intersection," which is what I did. And I just stopped the car. I said, "What are you doing just stopping?" I said, "I can't drive anymore. Everything's black around me." So my husband came to switch with me, and that's when he realized that I was sitting in a pool of my own blood. So again, another change of plans, and he takes me to the side of the road so I could sit and stretch my legs, and my sister-in-law calls for an ambulance. It was at this time that it was pure chaos. I can remember. I'm just sitting there. I can't really do much, but my husband's yelling, "I can't lose my wife." My sister-in-law is saying, "Please, you need to get here. You need to get here. She's losing a lot of blood." And it was at that time that I felt all of my energy just escape my body. And I felt like I was looking through static. And I think to myself, wow, I wonder what this is going to be like, because I thought that was it for me. I later learned that my eyes were actually in the back of my head at this time. So my sister-in-law, she was on the phone with, tells her, have her get on her back. My husband puts me on my back. Someone puts a coat under me, and I remember what they said in health class when you're bleeding, to elevate wherever you're bleeding from above your heart. So I tilt my pelvis up, and I start to feel myself become a little bit more energetic. I wasn't running a marathon, but I also didn't feel like I was losing my life. And while we were waiting for the ambulance to come, an off-duty cop stopped and a nurse stopped, and they really couldn't do much, I guess, because of liability, but they did what they could to try and keep me lucid. When the ambulance arrived, they tried to give me an IV, and they couldn't find a vein because my body was in shock. My husband had to drive in the front seat. These things that, I guess, when you're going through a life or death situation, they do. And they took me to the hospital. Fortunately, I was 5 minutes away from Stony Brook. And upon arrival, there was a nurse there that I had met a few months previous. And so that gave me a sense of ease that there was someone there that I knew on the medical side of things. And the doctor, just the emergency room doctor, does a sonogram. I remember I'm laying on my left, so I'm not looking at the doctor as they're doing it, while they're looking at the screen. And the doctor says to another doctor, "We can't find a heartbeat." And I am squeezing my husband's hand, praying, and tears are dripping down my face, and I'm just thinking, I'm going to be one of those women that you hear about who lose their child at 29 weeks. And I pray and I pray, and they do a Doppler, which is another kind of scan, and they check for a heartbeat. And then I hear the magical sound, and for those of you who haven't heard it, it's almost like a horse galloping. It's a dun, 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 and they got the heartbeat. And so now they whisk me away to L&D, which is labor and delivery, where the doctor there, I'm giving her a brief history of my previous pregnancy, anything that was going on with this one. And I asked her, "Am I having this baby today?" She said, "We're going to hope not. We're going to have to just figure out why you're bleeding." And so they go to give me a speculum exam, and that's when the hemorrhaging it was like turning on a faucet, the amount of blood I was losing. And they said to me, to my husband, you've been through this before, you've had a C-section before, but this is going to be a little different. Megan, we're going to give you general anesthesia. You're going to be out for this. Michael, you can't stay in the room. Please take off your jewelry. And this is what I wear. I was able to take off my wedding band, and that was it, because this is how fast it moved. They gave me, I felt like almost instantly they had that needle in my arm to give me the general anesthesia. And they're wheeling me down the hallway, reading me my rights, telling me I could have a hysterectomy, they may need to do a vertical incision, I could lose my life. I mean, it was the gamut. It felt like I was in a TV show or a movie. And I said, whatever you do to save my baby, whatever you need to do. And I remember I got in that operating room. I look at Randy, that nurse that I told you I knew when she was there. And I look at the ceiling, and that was it. I was out. 2 hours later, 2.5 hours later, I was woken up to my husband by my side, and he told me that we had a baby girl, and that she was in the NICU, and that she was 2 pounds, 14 ounces. He said that our entire family was there in the waiting room, my parents, his parents, both of our siblings, and he said everyone's been crying. I said, why? And it was because no one knew if I was going to make it. And they had already counted the baby out. And then I learned Randy saved my life, that she was there to advocate for me. I didn't learn this from Randy. I learned it from other nurses and doctors who came in the room. They said if it wasn't for Randy being in there and knowing you, you wouldn't be here right now, neither would your daughter. See, my placenta was calcified like that of a 42-week pregnant woman. And that is very typical in somebody who has chronic drug abuse. And we're talking crack, cocaine, heroin, and a lot of it. And Randy knew me, and she knew that that wasn't the case. I mean, obviously they still needed to do a tox screen, but she knew that they didn't need to treat it as such. And I guess whatever she said and did in that operating room, I still don't know, saved my life. I am so fortunate to have had an advocate on my side in that room while I was unconscious and could not speak for myself. But how many mothers do not have that advocate? How many women, based on the color of their skin, are not taken seriously? I know how fortunate I am to be sitting here right now to tell you this story, and how fortunate I am that my daughter is here. Now, I learned so much from that point on, right? One, I had a placental abruption. I didn't even know that was possible because they don't tell you any of this stuff when you're pregnant. 2, my daughter was going in the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit, for a very long time, probably up until when her due date was, which was 11 weeks from then, at least. I learned about the complications. I learned about hand washing, so many different things, right? And this is actually a picture of her, if you want to see. That's her. She was a few days old. That's my hand. Those are her little fingers. I'm holding mine. She was intubated. I don't know if she's intubated. Yeah, she was intubated. She had jaundice, so those goggles she was wearing were for the bilirubin. Her bilirubin was light, so they had these, it's like UV light on her. That's why the picture is black and white. Anyway, so that was her. And so she was going to be in the hospital for a long time. Spoiler alert, 82 days is how long she was there. And I thought, well, what am I going to do about work? She was going to have a compromised immune system when she came home, so she couldn't go to my parents couldn't watch her like we would watch my son, and things had to be different. And I couldn't afford to take the 3 months off that she'd be in the hospital plus time when she came home. So fortunately, I had a really supportive supervisor, and we worked out an arrangement where I would work remotely while she was in the hospital and go into work once a week, which was in the city. And when she came home, I would take my maternity leave. Great, right? And it seemed to all work out. And so we spoke with HR. HR was on board. And when HR went and called United Healthcare, who was our short-term disability provider, which is what our maternity leave was covered under, they said, no, you can't do that. Excuse me? No, you can't. is what they had told HR. So HR gets back to me, and I'm like, oh, well, you must not have told the story. Why can't I do that? So I call United Healthcare, explain the situation. They said, unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. I said, let me explain the situation to you again. And they said, maternity leave, aka short-term disability, is only for the mother's rehabilitation after childbirth and is not for bonding with the child. I'll say that again. Short-term disability, which many companies use as their maternity leave, is for the rehabilitation of the mother after childbirth and not for bonding with the newborn. Flabbergasted I was. I said, okay. I guess I'm forfeiting my maternity leave because I need to be home with her when she comes home from the hospital. And so I forfeited my maternity leave. And fortunately, New York had just started paid parental leave. And when my daughter came home, I stayed home for about, I think it was 8 weeks. Paid parental leave was only 6 weeks, and it was a fraction of what I was making. But it was something. It was something. And very fortunately, we were able to afford me staying home for 8 weeks, not on full salary. But again, I mean, that's really eye-opening that there is only something established for the rehabilitation of the mother after childbirth and not to actually bond with the child. We don't see that as a priority in this country and in our insurance companies. In some states, but not in this country. So, while I was in the hospital, while my daughter was in the hospital, I was experiencing a lot of different things, a lot of, emotions that you really can't understand unless you actually were there or anticipate, I was very short and snap at people. I would cry easily. It was all excusable. I was going to a hospital every single day to visit my baby and watch her grow. And I would watch other babies not survive. I would be there for code blues on newborns. I mean, this is hard stuff that any mom who's been in the NICU or parent who's been in the NICU will tell you it's a secret society, and it really is, because you're seeing things of newborns that you shouldn't. So it was excusable, my feelings, my reactions, the way I was handling things, and not being myself. I mean, that was all part of what I was going through. But then when my daughter came home, which was supposed to be joyous, it wasn't. It was a feeling of loneliness. I didn't have this camaraderie between nurses and other mothers and the doctors. I didn't have these people to talk to about my experience. And everybody in my life, friends and family, thought everything's great, now your baby's home. And it wasn't. And the smallest thing would trigger me. I mean, the smallest thing. And I really didn't understand even what being triggered felt like, but that's what was happening. And I remember I had a checkup with my OBGYN, and I had told her what I was going through, and she prescribed me Zoloft. This will help you. This will help regulate your emotions. Great. I've never been on anything before, but whatever's going to help, bring it on. And I hated it. I mean, I watched This Is Us and didn't cry. So, I mean, that's what it did. And so I took myself off of it, which is not recommended, but I did it because I don't know. And then I went back to work. I remember I would go to work sometimes, and on the train I would sit there with this just overwhelming feeling like I had just woken up from a nightmare, and the feeling wouldn't go away, and it would last with me all day. There were days when I would take the train, I would take the subway, and I'd be walking to my office, and I would try to figure out a plan how I could turn around and go home. Not because I didn't feel well physically. It was my body, mentally. I felt this burden on my back, this weird, invisible energy on my back. And I would have panic attacks in the elevator, start breathing heavy. I remember being in a conversation once, and I couldn't even sit in it anymore. I was trying to figure out how I can get up, and I'm sitting there, and I had a very professional job, and I remember going to my neurologist because when you have a placental abruption, you have to see a slew of specialists. And I was telling them, I was on Zoloft, I didn't like it, this is how I'm feeling. And they gave me Xanax. Just, here's a prescription for Xanax, it'll help you better. It'll help you with your panic attacks. Those are panic attacks you're having. Okay, great, they gave me Xanax. So I've never taken Xanax before. It made me feel so doped up, but I would take a half a Xanax on the way into work in the morning, and maybe stop my panic attacks, but also made me feel like, I don't even know. I don't even know how to describe it. But I was making mistakes at work. I worked in finance. Fortunately, I was the one who caught those mistakes, and so it never got anywhere. But I was like, I can't do this. This is not good. So I had to see my OBGYN again, and I told her a bit about what was going on, and I think you really need to see a therapist. She told me, I think that's really what you need. This is now June, July. I had my daughter in November. So 7 to 8 months after is when I was then really pushed to go see a therapist. And it took me a few weeks of courage to call, but I did, and I made an appointment. And I learned my insurance didn't cover a therapist or a therapist. Maybe it's covered a therapist. I don't know, not this therapist. This therapist worked specifically with women who had children who were premature. That's what she was, not that she was known for, but she has done that work before, and many therapists did not. And so I wanted to see her. She was the one I wanted to see, so I had to pay out of pocket, right? But again, I was very fortunate that I was able to afford paying out of pocket once a week to see her. And I learned that I had PTSD, and I was having anxiety attacks. When my daughter was born, when I started hemorrhaging, and I was trying to fight for my life, my body now sent these responses whenever I was under stress that it thought it was dying. So that's what I went through. It took me a month to tell my husband that I was seeing a therapist, and I never told my parents that I went and saw a therapist. Is it the stigma behind mental health? I'm not sure. Is it because I wanted them to think that I was strong? Maybe. Is it because they don't understand? I don't know. I worked with that therapist for a long time, and I wouldn't say I ever got back to being the old Megan, because you can't after you go through something like that, but I'm a new Megan, and I'm a Megan who knows how to work with her anxiety. When that little person comes to visit, I say, hey, anxiety, go away. I mean, not really, but so that's kind of the story. That's the story of my daughter in a nutshell, being born. And it was hard. That was a very hard, very, very, very hard time. And I am one of the most fortunate people in going through a situation like that. I had an advocate on my side in that emergency room when I was under anesthesia. I was able to afford to stay home for those 8 weeks with my daughter, when a lot of people can't. I was able to find a therapist, and I had the courage to go see her, even though I don't have the courage to necessarily be honest with some people in my life about it. And I was able to afford paying for out of pocket. I know moms who were whose children were in the NICU that I met when my daughter was in there, and now it's been over 3 years, and they still haven't sought help. And they talk to me, and they just tell me how they're overwhelmed. They go through a lot of emotions when they talk to me about them, and it is just so important that we make mothers' mental health important, especially when going through something like this. This isn't something that should be shrugged off and say, okay, you're fine now, and that's what we do. We need to, as a country, as a system, as a society, put the health and the well-being of our mothers at the forefront, because if we cannot do that for our mothers, then who can we do it for? I mean, our mothers are the ones who are creating the future. Our babies are the future. And if we can't do these simple things, then where do we stand? Again, I know how fortunate I was every step of the way. And that doesn't mean that it was any easier. So I can only imagine how hard this is for women who are in different situations as mine. Thank you for watching.